Ohio by Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young is a protest song based on the shooting that took place in Kent State. The Kent State shootings occurred at Kent State University in Ohio and involved the shooting of unarmed college students by the Ohio National Guard on Monday, May the 4th, 1970. The guardsmen fired 67 rounds over a period of 13 seconds, killing 4 students and wounding 9 others, one of whom suffered permanent paralysis. Some of the students who were shot had been protesting the Cambodian campaign, which President Richard Nixon announced during a television address on April the 30th. The worst thing about it was that 2 of the students killed weren't part of the demonstration. They'd just come out of class from the journalism building, at that time on their way to the next class, and were looking at the protest, just seeing what the hell was going on. And they got killed. The 4 students who were killed were Jeffrey Miller, Alison Krauss, William Schroeder and Sandra Lee Shua. The 9 wounded students were Joseph Lewis, John Cleary, Thomas Grace, Alan Canfora, Dean Carla, Douglas Rentmore, James Russell, Robert Stamps and Donald Mackenzie. Dean Carla was permanently paralysed from his injury. There was a significant national response to the shootings. Hundreds of universities, colleges and high schools closed throughout the United States due to a student strike of 4 million students, and the event further affected public opinion at an already socially contentious time over the role of the United States in the Vietnam War. Neil Young wrote and composed the song after he saw the horrific images of the event in Life magazine given to him by David Crosby. He disappeared for several hours and returned with the song. The band went into the studio and recorded it live in only a few takes. Neil Young sought to keep the shootings as the main focus of the song, at the same time painting the US government of the time as incompetent and untrustworthy and altering the political landscape. The American counterculture movement took the group as its own after the song, giving the 4 members of the band status as leaders and spokesmen that they would enjoy to a varying extent for the rest of the decade. The 1960s hippie culture movement involved a variety of social concerns and beliefs. The hippies' primary thought was that life was about being happy, not about what others thought you should be. Their "if it feels good, do it" attitudes included little forethought nor concern for the consequences of their actions. Hippies were dissatisfied with what their parents had built for them, a rather strange belief given that their parents had built the greatest booming economy the world had ever seen. Hippies rejected established institutions, calling them the establishment, Big Brother and the man. Hippies believed the dominant mainstream culture was corrupt and inherently flawed, and sought to replace it with a utopian society. Hippies rejected middle-class values, opposed nuclear weapons and the Vietnam War. They embraced aspects of Eastern philosophy and sought to find new meaning in life. The Vietnam War had been raging at full force for more than 5 years. Amid growing popular opposition in the United States, as the US casualties mounted into the tens of thousands, and Vietnamese casualties into the millions. The invasion of Cambodia triggered a wave of mass protests against the war across the country, which had been building up since 1965. President Lyndon B. Johnson had been forced to withdraw from his re-election campaign in March 1968. The 1968 Democratic Convention had witnessed bloody clashes after Chicago Democratic Mayor Daley had mobilized his police against anti-war demonstrators. In 1965, a series of spontaneous ghetto rebellions involving the most oppressed sections of African American workers and youth demanded that the dismantling of Jim Crow segregation be followed by genuine social equality. The year 1970 saw the greatest number of strikes in 2 decades. Just weeks before Kent State, the first ever national postal strike had led the Nixon administration to call out the National Guard to move the mail. The response of the ruling class to the militancy of workers and students was immediate. It demonstrated that it was capable of the same ruthlessness at home as that exhibited in imperialist war abroad. Its methods included direct violence, as at Kent State, Augusta and Jackson State, and methods of provocation, as in the notorious COINTELPRO operations that were used to infiltrate movements of students, minority workers and youth. Black Panther leaders Fred Hampton and Mark Clark had been brutally gunned down in their beds in 1969. Malcolm X was killed in 1965. And Martin Luther King Jr. in 1968. And there were many reasons to see the hands of the FBI behind these crimes. The murderous response by the forces of the state at Kent State amounted to bringing the war home against the American people. The musical partnership of David Crosby, Stephen Stills and Graham Nash, with and without Neil Young, was not only one of the most successful touring and recording acts of the late 60s, 70s and early 80s, with the colourful, contrasting nature of the members' characters and their connection to the political and cultural upheavals of the time. It was the only American-based band to approach the overall societal impact of the Beatles. The album Crosby, Stills and Nash, released in 1969, was perfectly in tune with the times, and the group proved an instant hit. By the time of their first tour, which included the Woodstock Festival, they had added Neil Young, also a veteran of Buffalo Springfield, like Stephen Stills. Neil Young maintained a solo career. Richard Nixon was elected President of the United States in 1968, based in part on his promise to bring an end to the war in Vietnam. In late April of 1970, however, the United States invaded Cambodia and widened the Vietnam War. The decision was announced on national television and radio on April the 30th, 1970 by President Nixon, who stated that the invasion of Cambodia was designed to attack the headquarters of the Viet Cong, which had been using Cambodian territory as a sanctuary. Protests occurred the next day, Friday, May the 1st, across United States college campuses, where anti-war sentiment ran high. At Kent State University, an anti-war rally was held at noon. Fiery speeches against the war and the Nixon administration were given. A copy of the Constitution was buried to symbolize the murder of the Constitution, because Congress had never declared war, and another rally was called for noon on Monday, May the 4th. Friday evening in downtown Kent began peacefully, with the usual socializing in the bars, but events quickly escalated into a violent confrontation between protesters and local police. Kent Mayor Leroy Satram declared a state of emergency and ordered all of the bars closed. The decision to close the bars early increased the size of the angry crowd. Police eventually succeeded in using tear gas to disperse the crowd from downtown, forcing them to move several blocks back to the campus. Kent Mayor Satram made the decision to ask Governor Rhodes to send the Ohio National Guard to Kent. The crowd of about 2,000 at the university retaliated and pelted the ROTC building with stones and flares, setting it alight. At 10:30 p.m, martial law was declared at Kent. All this led to the incidents of the shootings on campus by the National Guard on Monday, May the 4th. A little more than a month after Kent State, Nixon established the President's Commission on Campus Unrest. In a September 1970 report, the Commission acknowledged that the National Guard shootings on May the 4th had been unjustified, but drew no other conclusions. Overall, Ohio is a very simple song, written mainly in the first person. In just 10 lines, Neil Young captured the fear, frustration, and anger felt by college students across the country. It is also repetitive, which impacts more on the message, especially hearing 4 dead in Ohio over and over. Tin soldiers refers to the National Guard, the word tin used because they are not real soldiers. Nixon coming describes how Nixon needed to draft 150,000 more troops for the invasion of Cambodia, which had been announced 4 days before the shootings. We're finally on our own can be taken to mean that citizens can no longer rely on the government to keep them safe. This summer we hear the drumming refers to the marching of the National Guard. 4 dead in Ohio speaks for itself, referring to the shooting of the 4 students. Should have been done long ago is eerie. Some claim that this was actually said by Nixon at an interview, referring to the killings of the students and keeping them at bay. What if you knew her and found her dead on the ground? Refers to the famous picture that hit newspapers and magazines everywhere. After the event of a dead student in the Kent State parking lot with another student kneeling over her.
This does not mean I don't love you, I do, that's forever. Yes, and for all